we were asked to share the story of publishing Nosy Crow's book, which is a digital book at the moment, but will be a print book, as we'll mention shortly, called Coronavirus, a Book for Children. I'm the managing director of Nosy Crow and a founder of it. We're a 50-person company. We're based in London, and we are the publishers of children's books, fiction and non-fiction, for children between the ages of 0 and 12. On the night of the 17th of March, which I think is the night that that the first indication that we were going to be encouraged to work from home as office workers happened from our government, I was on the phone to a friend who is a head teacher in Canary Wharf, which is an area of London, an area of some real challenges in terms of the demographic of the children there, very high percentage of children who are pupil premium children. She was talking about, which means that they are getting extra support from the government, for example, free school meals. For those of you who are not familiar. So she was talking about how terribly distressed and anxious children and indeed their parents were about the coronavirus. This was immediately before the schools shut down, and how challenging it was for them to find accurate information that on the one hand didn't minimize the likely impact of the disease both physically and emotionally, but also was something that gave clarity around the science. And I sympathized. She's a head teacher and she was in a very difficult situation. I was a publisher and I was in quite a difficult situation because I was going to have to get rid of the office effectively and let everybody in the office, the 50 people in the office, migrate home, some of them with thousands of pounds worth of Apple Mac machines tucked under their arms for the foreseeable future. So I went to sleep and I woke up the next morning, and cycling into work that next morning, I thought we could do a book about this. We could do a non-fiction book that would help Sarah's children, our friend's children. We could do it digitally. We would have to make it free. So we had to make it free, and we would have to make it quickly. We'd have to respond to the needs of those children now. So the first thing I did when I got in, and I've still got the email, is that at 8:22 in that morning, I wrote to Axel Scheffler. Axel Scheffler may be familiar to some of you. He's the illustrator of The Gruffalo, for example. It's a book that's been translated very widely, and it's hugely, hugely successful here in the UK. And so I wrote to him. I worked with him for decades, and said, would you be willing to donate your work for this? Would you be willing to illustrate this book? And he immediately shot back, yes. And so then I had to think about how we would write the book, which was not something I necessarily actually put my mind to at that point. And I realized that we could glean a lot of information, but there was a lot of things that were unknown about the virus, and that we needed a scientific expert. And I'd heard somebody called Professor Graham Medley from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine speaking on a BBC interview. And I Googled his name and I found him, and I wrote him an email and said, would you be willing to provide your scientific expertise for no payment for this project? And sent that off into the ether. And then we spent some time waiting for that to happen. The other thing, I was aware that Graham Medley could provide a kind of scientific robustness to this book, but I was also aware that there were people who were dealing very directly with children and understanding what their questions were and what their needs were. And so I got back in touch with my friend Sarah and contacted another head teacher and a deputy head teacher, all in London, as it happened, which is where the epicenter of the crisis was at that point, the growing crisis was at that point. And we also got in touch with a psychologist, a child psychologist, who works at the Evelina Children's Hospital, which is the one attached to St. Thomas's, which is where, for those of you who don't know, Boris Johnson was treated actually a few weeks later. So Sarah Carman is a child psychologist who works there, and they agreed that when the text was written, they would look at the text. We then spent a whole wad of time getting everybody out of the office and getting set up to run a 50-person company, and we didn't really think about it for a few days, which is where Elizabeth comes in.
Well, so this is probably not only like the fastest, but one of the most difficult books I've ever had to written. And when Kate said, let's do a book, I thought, yes, let's do a book. But then it was like, how do we do this book? Because, you know, we knew we wanted to be truthful and factual and quite straightforward and give them answers to these questions, but also at the same time appropriate and helpful and reassuring. And it's the kind of topic which, particularly at that time, did not feel helpful or reassuring or appropriate at all. And it was so early on, and we were sort of grasping at every new development and trying to sort of make sense of it ourselves, and making sense of that for 7-year-olds was a whole different ballgame. But when I'm writing about topics like this, I quite often use the question and answer format just to sort of help frame it. And that's where it felt like it was a really useful jumping off point for this. Because children are often very matter of fact, and they live in this world of sort of absolutes and always jump in with these sort of very...
Oh, have we lost Elizabeth? Surely we haven't lost Elizabeth. We have.
A little bit of a delay.
Okay, so I will just take up. They often jump in with these very kind of bold questions. And the first thing that I did was I tried to write this as a narrative. I should explain that. Kind of, you know, once a little while ago, a boy someone in China got this illness and this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened. And it was Elizabeth who said, no, the Q&A is the answer. And the first thing that Elizabeth did was write the spread that talked about what can happen to you when you get coronavirus. So she talked about death. And we thought if we were able to talk about death, Elizabeth, we were okay. So I've just said that the first spread you tackled was the one about dying, the possibility of dying.
Sorry about that. Yeah, and it was that, why are people worried about coronavirus? And I thought, if we can't do that spread, there is absolutely no way we can make this book work. It's just not going to be possible. And that was I think the first spread I did, and I sort of did it kind of the first, probably it was still that first week, and I sort of jumped straight in with, people have to go to hospital, you know, sometimes people sadly might die. And it felt like once we'd nailed that, I mean, that took, it may have only been 200 words, but I think that took about 3 hours to put together, because we really had to sort of, yeah, get that question across. But once we'd done that, the rest of it seemed to come together relatively easily. And to keep the book sort of reassuring and helpful, we were balancing out these difficult facts with very practical, focused, useful advice about, you know, washing hands and being kind, and realizing that your parents and siblings were also having all these difficult feelings and were feeling upset, and that sort of feeling of the group effort and the community, which I think really helped sort of bring the book together and make it a sort of a useful and reassuring way of disseminating this information, and kind of without being, without sort of glossing over the hard bits, but also making it feel like something that felt appropriate for children and helpful in the context. And the other thing to say is we were also writing this about a situation that was developing all the time. So we were literally making changes and corrections, I think, right up to the day we published it. But I think the finished product really sort of reflected that time and was really helpful.
We published it on the 6th of April, illustrated by Axel, with all the advisors' comments as far as we could, taken in and incorporated. I'm sorry, that's my dog, if you can hear it. And that's great. And it was downloaded 1.3 million times from our own website. You can see it there. Of course, the situation, and it's been translated, by the way, into 60 languages, including Rohingya and British Sign Language, as well as more obvious ones. So we're really proud of that. We made it freely available to everybody. You can read it for free. You can do what you want with it, as long as you keep the integrity of the book. We've decided that because things are changing rapidly, we had to do another edition reflecting changes in the UK, and we welcomed other people in other countries to reflect the changes that are happening in their countries, and to use the book as the situation develops. We continue to have a free digital version available on the nosycrow.com website, but on the 23rd of July, we will publish a print edition. This cannot be free because we're an independent company. It has to cost some money. It costs £1.99. Of that, £1 goes to NHS charities together, and the remaining pound covers print and booksellers' costs. We will make nothing from this. The initial print run is, I think, 20,000 copies. We're printing it in the UK so we can go back regularly. That's obviously a big difference from 20,000 copies from 1.3 million downloads, and we still think that the free digital version is the one that's going to have most value to most people. I think that's it.